Yes, I can. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Hopefully, this will not be too boring nor entirely useless. Let me find the PowerPoint. Uh, I think it's there, right? So, yeah, the 28th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. So, I'll start this very brief talk with some preliminary considerations about both the Constitution and the program that I teach it in. Uh, we tend to teach around 31 texts in our Freedom and Citizenship program. The syllabus changes every now and then, but that tends to be the number. And of those texts, the Constitution tends to be the one, obviously, that students know the most. And some of them have engaged with it quite intensely in their high school classes. Another thing is that of the ones we teach at FNC at Columbia, it is the only one, it is one of two, sorry, that has been written by a collective. The other one is obviously the Seneca Falls Declaration of Sentiments, which echoes the Declaration of Independence in very interesting ways. And of those documents, it's the only legally binding one. So it's a very peculiar text to teach and read in the same class that you have been reading things like Socrates or Hobbes or Locke. And of course, all texts can be said to be living, right? Uh, Probably much of what we do is to bring them to life uh, when we read them with our students and talk about them. Um, so particularly in the seminar environment, that is very much true, but formally speaking, the Constitution is particularly alive. In fact, many of you probably know that there is uh, uh, a branch of scholarship that argues that the Constitution has been engineered to be a living document from the outset, that it was written in intentionally vague terms, so that uh, the successive generations would be able to adapt it to their new context without changing it dramatically, right? It's a text that has been written in order to be reenacted, relived, reinterpreted. And whether one accepts that that is true or not, it is an undeniable fact that the Constitution is very much alive for our students. It determines much of their lives and independently even of their citizenship status, because of course sometimes we have students that are not American citizens, but they are living in the United States in a country, a commonwealth, and an environment that is very much shaped by this document, right? So all these obvious things about the Constitution shaped my thoughts as I prepared to teach it for the first time. I felt very strongly that for these and many other reasons, it could not be taught in the same standard seminar discussion format that I use for most of the other FNC texts. Um, and another consideration that informed this rather peculiar, perhaps pedagogical approach was that at the time I was, and I still continue to think a lot about gamifying my classroom. Um, it's something that I do quite naturally because most of my day job is as a language teacher. And of course, the communicative approach mandates that you engage with students dynamically in every single session. But doing it in this context uh, is very different, and is sometimes either frowned upon or just it creates some anxiety. Am I going to actually, be able to address the depth and complexity of the topic uh, when I introduce some kind of game component? So I was thinking of all of these things as I was preparing to teach the Constitution during my first summer at FNC. And I was reading Jane McGonigal, who wrote this book with a very provocative title, Reality is Broken. And part of her argument is precisely that um, the prevalence of games and particularly video games in our young communities has changed them dramatically, but not necessarily in ways that are counterproductive to education, but uh, we need to meet them where they are. And she has this argument that I find fascinating um, about the effect that uh, constant video gaming has in a young person's perception of reality. She writes, reality does not motivate us effectively. It isn't engineered to maximize our potential. It wasn't designed from the bottom up to make us happy. And so there is a growing perception in the gaming community reality compared to games is broken. As I was reading this, I was also preparing to teach the Constitution. And of course, the Constitution starts with that uh, very famous statement that we, the people of the United States, uh, in order to form a more perfect union and establish justice and domestic tranquility and provide for common defense and the general welfare, etc., write this Constitution. And I thought, well, it seems to me that what the Constitution is trying to do is to redesign reality to make us happy, right? To reform the way that reality works for our communities in such a way that everybody will have the possibility to do those things that McGonigal says reality doesn't do to help us realize our potential, uh, to help us intervene in it effectively, and to motivate us and to help us find a path, right? That is one of the reasons why the Constitution is so ambitious. So with all these things revolving in my head, I thought of the crazy idea of gamifying my classroom in order to teach the Constitution, thinking about these things, that the Constitution is a living document, that I needed to bring that life into the classroom somewhat, that teaching the Constitution effectively necessarily implied involving each individual student in its not just reading, but its writing. So the idea I came up with was this exercise, which I call the 28th Amendment to the Constitution of the US. As we all probably know, um, the Constitution of the US is a very peculiar document also because every time it has been amended, uh, those amendments are explicitly contained as amendments in the Constitution, right? That does not tend to happen in other commonwealths. You know, they don't perpetuate the corrections as corrections so explicitly. Um, and 33 of them have been proposed, but only 27 have been approved. But among those approved are absolutely fundamental things like the Bill of Rights, right? So I thought that maybe proposing students to create their own amendment would not just involve them in intense reading of what's already there, but uh, motivate them to think of this document as actually living and to motivate them to try and think how they would change it within their context. So the premise, I just tell them that we have decided, the powers that be, that there's going to be a new 28th Amendment, but the process is going to be a lot different from the usual. There's just 15 citizens that have been selected to uh, to propose that amendment and to choose which one will actually be passed. And those citizens are you guys. You guys are the 15 representatives of the people. And the way this works in the classroom is that each of them has to propose an amendment that they consider is the most important, the most appropriate for this particular time. Each of them also gets to vote in the subsequent election that will actually choose which amendment. And the way they present this is each of them makes a 2 minute speech. And they have usually it's 10 to 15 minutes to prepare this 2 minute speech. Um, I do this out of the blue. I don't tell them that this is going to happen when we read the Constitution. I like doing it out of the blue because I feel that if I tell them that this is going to happen, they're going to be stressing about the idea of doing it. They're going to, uh, maybe even the most diligent among them will start actually writing and thinking about their delivery. And I feel that this can actually be detrimental in many ways. Um, to the engagement, particularly of those that are not so amenable to participation or are shy or anxious. I feel that doing this kind of surprise tabula rasa moment, everybody's going to talk today, and it's going to be an official speech, 2 minutes. This actually puts everyone on an equal footing. And in my experience, it actually works beautifully in the sense that, yes, it forces those quiet people to talk, but they know that the others are exactly at the same level. Everyone is equally as surprised, and sometimes they are among the best speakers, actually. Um, the idea, obviously, of the exercise is that the amendment that we will choose will come from those 15. Uh, so after everybody does their speech, they have to vote. The way I structure the vote is very peculiar too. Um, I give everyone the possibility of voting for three of the proposals. Um, a first place vote, a second place vote, and a third place vote, and each of those get a number of points. I think it works better not just because this kind of system actually in bigger political systems tends to be more fair, but also um, I think that as opposed to just giving them the possibility of one vote, this actually gives them the possibility to vote uh, for the work of more of their peers and recognizing what they have done, but also think more deeply about each of the options. I think that when you are given the possibility of having three votes instead of one, your thought process is more complex because you have to actually uh, rank them and think about the nuances, the subtle differences between each of those choices. And in doing that, of course, they're also implicitly preparing for the second part of the exercise, which is the discussion. Simultaneously, however, I also give them um, a second vote that they need to take for the best speech. Um, the reason why I do this is manifold. First, I just like the idea of motivating them to be rhetorically effective. Um, I think that really inspires some students, particularly those that, uh, have some sort of uh, inclination to acting, or these types of students really enjoy uh, this sort of exercise. But it also motivates interesting meditations on the importance of rhetoric in our current political landscape, right? Persuasion is still very much um, very, very important when it comes to what decisions are going to be actually enacted. And sometimes we tend to forget about that. Um, so this is intended to be a way of emphasizing also that aspect. Um, and also something that was honestly unintended, but has become one of my favorite uh, parts of teaching FNC every summer is that in my seminars, this has grown beyond the actual seminar room. Uh, it has become a thing that is mentioned after the classes are over. It has become a thing that is sometimes even mentioned in recommendation letters or in our last meeting, in which we also give another set of very creative awards, but it's referenced that someone won the best speech or someone's amendment was adopted. And this, I feel, also serves that other objective that I feel our programs have, which is creating a sense of community, having those kinds of um, collective exercises uh, in which everyone participates both in the development of the exercise and in the decision and the ultimate, uh, conclusion of the exercise. I think that really fosters that togetherness. Um, and after we do all this crazy speechifying and the voting, and everyone gets really excited when someone finally wins both best speaker and the amendment that we're going to adopt, there comes a much more meditative moment in which we need to actually write what the amendment will say. Because obviously, it's one thing to decide, okay, we're going to give Supreme Court justices a certain limited term or something. And it's another entirely to actually think, okay, this is going in the Constitution. What is it going to look like? Right? And that, I think, is a moment in which um, it is strongly revealed to everyone in the room how important the actual language in which the law is written is, right? Um, how ultimately what we have really that our society is based on is texts, and those texts are made of words organized in certain ways. And putting those words together is a deeply uh deeply problematic but also deeply fascinating moment. So giving them that opportunity to actually sit together and think, how are we going to write this on the Constitution, I feel is uh one of my favorite moments of the exercise, one in which they really engage both with the textual mechanics of producing something that will become law, but also with all the implications of interpretation that come with that. Um, and Partly as some informational material, but also because it's fun. Fun, particularly for me to reminisce, because I have taught this a number of times. I went through some of the things that I have done in the past and looked at amendments that FNC students have proposed, and I listed them here. The ones that are in bold are amendments that were actually approved by the Assembly of Citizens, right? So those were the ones that passed. The first semester that I taught this, I think it was very telling that the one that passed overwhelmingly was repealing the Second Amendment. Um, and another thing that this exercise does is tell you a lot about your students. I give them sometimes some suggestions because I feel that obviously some students need them, but uh, consistently they come up with their own amendments, and whatever it is that they think must change in their society is what they give you, and this is so incredibly revealing as an educator to have that opportunity. Other proposals: abolishing the Electoral College, lowering the minimum age to vote. This is always a very popular one, of course, but it has never passed, which I find interesting. Establishing a constitutional right to gender equality, including linguistic minorities in the groups protected by the Bill of Rights. That's a fascinating one. Establishing federal rights to free gender expression. uh, expression of gender, right? Not just that one to me is particularly fascinating. The right to abortion, enshrining it in the Constitution, reparations for African Americans or Native Americans or both. A federal right to housing is one that is consistently proposed, which again tells us so much about our students. Establishing a federal right to healthcare, mandating a universal basic income, um, open border state in those words. That was very bold and inspire a very interesting discussion because actually many people were passionately against it from positions that to me were unexpected. These were very progressive people that thought this was a terrible idea. Abolishing the death penalty. Another one that passed. Establishing free higher education as a federal right. Uh, Granting immigrants the right to vote. This one came up last semester, enshrining in the Constitution the principle that the president is not above the law. Mandating nuclear disarmament. This is the one that passed the last time. Term limits for Supreme Court justices. This was argued very forcefully by a student that was adamant that they wanted to study law and they knew a lot about this and their arguments were very powerful. Establishing a right to environmental security. And the last one I also find particularly fascinating. I think that this one might be inspired by something that is actually found currently in the Chilean constitution, mandating that the land, the ecosystem, and/or the planet are subjects of rights. Um, so all of these things have been proposed by my students during this exercise. And we always say that in the classroom, it is us that learn. It seems to me that the most successful classes that I teach are always the ones in which I learn the most. And I don't know if it's selfish of me ultimately, but I think that the main reason why I like this exercise so much is that it teaches me a lot about my students, about American society that is, adoptive for me. And, but I think I'm very much here now in many ways, intellectually, geographically, sentimentally, and it is always a great experience to see what that means for others and particularly for others so young. Um, and it teaches me constantly how incredibly brilliant our students are and how passionate. It's truly humbling. Um, so to the question that made me so anxious when I taught this for the first time, was I going to actually, with this crazy idea, be able to teach what I wanted to teach? The answer is a resounding yes. And much, much more than that. It has inspired me to try and do similar things with other texts in other types of classes. Um, but this one very much remains like the original moment in which I went crazy in the classroom, I guess, and it paid off. Uh, Thank you.